Hello, I'm Harold Rivas, host of the Resilient CISO, and welcome to the latest episode of our LinkedIn Live series. I'm joined today by Shawn Valle, who is the fractional CISO and security advisor at Cybersecurity Growth. He's had former roles at some key organizations like Rapid7 and Flagship Pioneering. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you very much, Harold. Excited to be here today.
Excellent, excellent. So today I thought it would be great for us to really think about how people come into this role, how people come into becoming a CISO, the various pathways. I know you've, of course, had your own path, not only going into the cybersecurity industry, but a variety of different organizations that you help lead. Let's talk about some of the essential skills, experiences for those people that are aspiring to become CISOs.
Sure. I think there are many pathways that folks get into this and many different skills. My pathway was I came from software engineering, moved into professional services and learned a little bit around the world of governance and compliance through some of the professional services work I had done, and got into application and product security from there. So my background in software engineering to start my career helped me move into product and application security. And I stumbled my way into a security operations role at one point. And I realized I had this unique background of pieces. And to tie them all together, I think the professional services side was I enjoyed having conversations with humans. So I liked the people aspect of it. And I tied all of those pieces together and I thought maybe that CISO role, maybe that security leadership role might be a good path for me because I have these different technical backgrounds and I enjoy the people aspect. The one aspect I still needed to learn, and I think I will always be learning, is the business aspect. And it's such a critical piece to be able to understand what are the goals, what are the objectives of the organization you're working with, and how do you translate all of these interesting security and compliance pieces into the objectives and the business goals of your organization that you're working with. And I felt like that was the piece that I really had to learn in my first CISO role. And now as I talk with others, I say it's one of the key things you really need to understand that you didn't need to focus on earlier in your roles. Understanding, what does finance care about? What does sales care about? What does the CEO care about? And how do you make sure your business, your security program aligns with what their objectives are?
That is awesome, Shawn. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about a couple of different situations because people do come to this career through a variety of means. They might have come through like that governance, risk and compliance, that auditor type of role. And that, of course, brings with it a different set of skills that they might need to then round out. But universally, I think because we almost always originate either from a technology or controls framework, worldview, that business acumen is almost always an area that they really need to make investments in. It's probably been your experience, but it certainly has been mine in coaching members of the team. So often, those people you're trying to coach into that role are focused on what other technical skill do I need to develop to become a CISO? And I've said like point blank, it's already baked in. You already have enough technical skill. You'll always be learning. It is the rounding out, as you just touched upon, needing to have all those diverse skills, especially the business acumen, what I would call the operator persona that really gets how the business or the organization functions. It's probably one of the most key, right?
Yeah, it's funny as you mentioned the technical skills. I think for many of us, it's that feeling of we need to know as much as we can to be able to answer all of the questions, usually all of the technical questions, all of the security questions, all of the compliance questions. And that's not the number one skill that's needed for any of our roles specifically. And it's definitely not the skill that's needed the most for that leadership role. Really understanding and learning the business is really where that time invested is needed for that next stage. But I feel like many of us have that experience, and I have it myself. I will admit to it as myself that, early on in my roles, I wanted to make sure I knew everything there was to know. So if any question came my way, I'd be able to provide an answer, not realizing that it is actually okay to say, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you. and then to be able to, come back later and provide that awareness. But as you grow into those leadership roles, it is about learning the other areas of the business, how they operate, what their leaders expect, and how can you help them support their goals and their mission. Because in many cases, the goals and the mission of the company isn't to be the most secure company. The goals and the missions of the company is not to be the most compliant organization. So learning what those expectations are can really help you determine, how do I shape not only what my team is doing, but how do I shape the translation of those stories into the business expectations.
Indeed, indeed. So let's shift gears a little bit to building resilient teams, right? Looking at your experience, you've scaled teams, you've built out organizations. Your product security experience is also really beneficial in helping you be able to understand how to influence and direct, engineering teams and others. But let's think about the emerging CISO as they lead teams, as they emphasize resilient concepts and they build resilient teams. Let's think about some of the goals and executive expectations in building a team.
I think building a team, and this could go for any function across the organization. Obviously, our area of expertise is information security and cybersecurity. And I think the importance of building a team, there's you as the leader looking inward at yourself. Where are your strengths?
Mhm.
Where are your weaknesses? Being able to have that humility and recognize, one, I always need to learn, but I also need to round out my organization with the skills that maybe I lack. So you as a
Mhm.
security leader may come from an audit and a compliance background. Maybe you don't have those deep technical skills, round the team out there. Vice versa. Maybe you come from a deep technical background and you're not familiar or you're not well rounded in the GRC world. Well, you can round your team out there. So I think there's a piece of, from a team perspective, of growing the team. But as we think about making the team resilient, there are some things that are really critical that I don't think we think about as individual contributors, which we, as we were talking a moment ago, we want to be the expert in our field, and sometimes not understanding, again, what are the core objectives that we want to deliver for the business themselves. So I love working with my staunch security purists who love their areas and they want to make their areas as secure, as protected, as compliant as can be. And I don't want them to stop working that way. I want them to continue to mature our security program. For those that are in the leadership functions on my team or looking to aspire into the CISO type role, I want to make sure that they understand, not only do you want to continue that security purist path, but you need to start translating more over towards the business itself. What are the goals? What are the objectives? We mentioned that previously, but I think that's one of the critical things. I do believe that from a security leader perspective, as you look inside and determine where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, you can start asking yourself questions around, hey, what archetype are you as a security leader? Are you a builder? Are you an engineer? Are you more strategic? Are you more customer facing? You like being in front of people and speaking with people? And there's many others. Obviously, there's the unicorn, which I think all of us, all companies wish they had, was that unicorn CISO. But you being able to understand what type of background you are and where your strengths are can really help you figure out your own resiliency. And then how do you round out your leadership team and help them with their resilient path?
Yeah, Sean, I have a term I borrowed from Business at the Speed of Thought. This was a Bill Gates book from like the 90s, I believe. And he used the term N plus one hiring, right? So it's if I'm N, I'm hiring somebody that's N plus one, someone who's better at me in application security, somebody who's far more conversant in, let's say, a particular regulatory environment or concern, or you name the discipline, the area of focus, such that you end up with these SMEs, these true talents in each of these respective spaces, and that really does create the right kind of environment. I love referring to my team as the Avengers. Assembling the Avengers. There, it's all a bunch of very specialized people with their own thing to add, and I have no problem deferring to their leadership, their thought leadership, in making decisions. Right? It's important to understand that CISO doesn't mean you know everybody's job and can do everybody's job better than they can. When it comes to building resilient teams, you're really in the business of assembling people with varying skills and tolerances. As you said, the purist, the person who's just going to be, this is the way. That's great. You need that voice in the room too, because oftentimes they're going to catch something you missed, right? So yeah, I absolutely love. This is one of the big fun parts about being a CISO is getting to build teams and develop talent. But one of the other parts is communicating up and out of the organization, communicating to the board. And I have found that generally speaking, the concepts of cyber resilience are easier to understand, easier to convey than the hard and fast concepts of technical controls and, the latest threats and advanced malware and all these different kinds of campaigns. I'm curious, in your experience, what are you seeing? What have you seen with regards to communicating cyber risk, especially concepts around cyber resilience at the board level?
Yeah, I think the easy button that many of us defer to initially is communicating vulnerabilities of the organization. Where are the vulnerabilities that we have, and how many vulnerabilities have we addressed, and how many do we still have to address? Uh, the risk catalog or the risk register backlog. Here are all the risks we have, and here are all the risks we addressed. Here's the green, yellow, and red heat maps of where we have security issues. And I learned early on that's the wrong approach. And in fact, that's not the approach that my leadership specifically needs, that my board specifically needs, because they are thinking about risk to the business. And so, of course, if I'm new to my seat, I always think risk to the business means security risk, right? And oftentimes my leadership teams, nearly all times, my leadership team is looking at risk to revenue, risk of growth to the business, risk of customer retention, depending on the type of organization you're in, risk of customer churn, right? So every organization has a different level of objectives, but I'm highlighting the ones from orgs that I've been close with. And as a security leader, none of those things were on the top of my list to get started when I was thinking about my own business objectives, nor was I thinking of that as the objectives to the business. And as I've learned and I've evolved, and as I share with others now, recognizing what does the actual company care about. And when you go into your executive meetings or your board meetings, think about the security items, like I mentioned earlier, vulnerabilities and risks that we've identified or risks we've reduced, or the amount of assets we have put our endpoint security on. Think about those security items that you've had and determine, how do those align with the business objectives? And I just highlighted some of those. If they don't align, there's no reason they don't belong. If they do align, figure out how to take that item and tell a story. So the key piece here is the storytelling piece. Figure out how to tell a story that ties what you have worked on, or the risk that has not been addressed, or the vulnerabilities that we're working on to address. Make sure that they align with one of the actual business objectives that the rest of the leadership team truly care about in their day-to-day job. One, you'll make friends with the leadership team. You'll make friends with the board by doing that. They'll recognize that what you are trying to achieve aligns with their goals of risk to the business. And now you'll be able to tie true business risk to what your security risk is. I really think that storyteller piece is a critical piece, but it's more than just being able to tell stories. It's being able to listen to what the objectives and the goals are of your business, and converting those objectives to what your security objectives are, and being able to tell a story of how you are helping the company achieve the goals they have.
Spot on. I think storytelling is probably one of the most critical skills we certainly didn't develop in any technical training. It's all part of leadership. It's part of becoming an effective leader that earns the C in CISO, as I like to say. If I could share one tidbit that I would add to that, that has, I think, been really beneficial in the past, is when you are preparing, if you're a CISO newly in the seat or just getting ready to present to the board for the first time, or if you've done it before, but this is a new context, please, 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 if you take one thing out of this conversation, research your board members, understand what their experience has been, what their career has been. Oftentimes these board members might serve on multiple boards. And it's really, I think CISOs like to think in terms of risks and threats. Last thing you want to do is have a board member ask you a question about a cyber risk or cyber incident they're intimately familiar with that has occurred at another company they support, and you're not conversant, you're not skilled, you're not able to express an opinion, understand what they're saying exactly intimately, because of course they had to become very familiar with what happened at that other organization. So understand who you're talking to. It's a function of storytelling. It's a function of communication that you know who you're talking to, and therefore it's worth the effort to go and understand that audience better by preparing in advance.
Couldn't agree more. Can I add a little bit to that, because
Yeah.
I have a couple real stories that align with it. My first board meeting that I presented at, not knowing the things we're talking about right now, by the way, learning by mistake, I had a board member who I had not researched my board, who had asked me, "Hey, Shawn, have you implemented a CASB yet?" At that time, CASB was foreign to me. I wasn't even familiar with the product or that space. And of course, the security purist in me said, "You should have an answer to this, Shawn. You should know everything, right?" And the reality was I didn't have an answer to it. And I was surprised that my board member knew of information security and cybersecurity products and terms, and it aligned very much with what you just described. They were working with another organization, another board, and it was a topic of their choice. I learned from that. I learned from that real world experience. Moving forward, research your board members, and one step further, identify, if possible, with your CEO, is there a board member that I can build a relationship with? Is there somebody on the board, maybe on the audit committee, that I can start with an email and then have a one-on-one conversation, and then possibly quarterly or monthly, we have a regular check-in outside of board meetings. And that had served me very well after I made my first major mistake, which I just walked us through.
We've all lived it, Shawn. I think that's part of the benefit of sharing these lessons learned, right? It's, yeah, find that member, probably the chair of the audit committee, that you're going to have the ability to build a relationship. The board is going to look to that individual when the CISO speaks to say, are we okay here? By having those pre-meetings, those reviews in advance, you get an opportunity to get them comfortable, let them ask questions of you. So it's smooth sailing during the board session. So great insights. And that actually gives us an opportunity to transition to looking ahead, thinking about the role of the CISO, thinking about future-proofing the role. There are so many new and evolving threats. Of course, there's geopolitics that affects the nature of what we do. Um, the technology itself is changing. AI is a major component. And look at that. We've gotten almost to the end of this, and we just brought up AI for the first time. But thinking about that next generation CISO, thinking about how to incorporate some of this into their long-term vision, right? So that they can be adaptable, they can maintain that executive presence, they can manage the relationships. What guidance, what thoughts might you share surrounding future-proofing the CISO role?
Yeah, the CISO role has changed rapidly in the past 10 plus years. I do believe the security leadership role came out of, in many cases, IT leadership that needed that security branch. And it has evolved. I do know a lot of CISOs still report into a CIO function or report into a CTO function, but it has grown considerably. And the map of core capabilities that fall under a CISO has exponentially grown in the past 10 years. Uh, if we just go back 12 years or so ago, cloud and SaaS was a very small thing. So if you think about the information security infrastructure, you're talking about your core organization. Now, from a technology perspective, we cloud SaaS has taken over. AI in the last several years has now become a major component. If I think about the key elements here for the CISO for the future, it is recognizing that this field will continue to grow, and the capabilities will grow. The outer perimeter of your infrastructure will just continue to grow. It's not something that the CISOs of past will be the right role for the future. We need to help our next generation leaders be able to recognize your large perimeter, your large scale. But I think some of the key things will stay focused. The C in CISO is an important item here, right? You are a chief, and so looking at your other chiefs, your other leadership peers. I know some of our CISOs may not sit officially in the executive table. Some do, some don't. But you act as the executive, be that executive, lead as an executive, and a key component is building strong relationships with your executive peers across the company, across the organization. Learn their pains, learn their challenges to what they need to deliver to the business. They might be security pains, they might not be security pains. And in fact, many of their pains won't be security pains. Learn their pains, and you, by learning their pains, you can transition it into your area of expertise to determine how can I help them reduce their pains. So building relationships with your executive peers, learning their pains, being able to translate their pains back to security speak, so you can then bring it to your team to help your team do what they do great, the security purists, to be in the compliance purists, to be able to deliver what your other executive leaders need. You're going to build great relationships with your leadership peers, and you'll be able to bring great OKRs back to your own team to be able to go deliver interesting things. I think that's really one of the most critical things moving forward.
Yeah, I think that connection back to your peers, that once again, the operator persona, the person that really gets how this business runs, what's in the mind of a CFO, what are their goals and objectives, and how do you find common ground with them? But then equally, how do you go find common ground with the head of a business unit, and the common ground with the head of your HR department? To earn that C is really to appreciate that you are a business operator first, and who happens to have a very specialized skill in cybersecurity and risk management, and that requires letting go of some certain things, letting go of certain, like that identity as being the SME and everything, which I certainly resonates with me. I always loved being able to go really, really deep into all these different concepts. Future proofing, but also along those lines, leveraging concepts like AI, for example. If there's a tidbit or a tip, just about any frontier model today, you can interact with it and say, hey, look, tell me how a board member might be considering cyber risk. Let's have, and you're having a dialogue with a persona, and you can have that LLM act in that persona. Or as a shorthand, if maybe you're not inherently familiar with the world of finance, hey, ChatGPT, or you name your favorite, give me a crash course on what a CFO might be interested in understanding, how they go about their day-to-day. So you develop that education. Nobody's born with this. You have to go out there and invest. And there are a great arsenal of tools now that can help accelerate our learning curve, figure out, what are going to be the most common areas for us to interact, right?
Yeah, it's you brought up AI, and I think I have stayed away from it just from, I know every conversation that we're having on a daily basis is around AI in many aspects. One is AI being used across the business. Is AI being used to secure the business? Are there people in the business who are not using AI? Well, then we will replace them with people who are using AI. We're not necessarily, many organizations saying we're not replacing people with AI, but we will replace people with other people who will use AI. For me, from my daily task, you'd mentioned ChatGPT. If you are in a CISO role and you don't have your own subscription, either your own personal or your own business paid subscription to ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude on your desk and using it on a daily basis, you're doing something wrong, right? You're living in the past. So thinking about future proofing the CISO, that's just, I think it's today proofing the CISO. I don't even know if it's future proofing.
That's a good way to put it.
Leverage these basic LLM tools. I'm thinking ChatGPT and Claude as two of the basics, Gemini, obviously Copilot as well. Leverage them as your executive assistant in a sense. Leverage them as your document writer. Leverage them as your document editor regularly, daily, hourly. leverage them as your calendar reviewer and manager. And I love how you use the example of leverage them as personas to act as a CFO, feed them the details of the persona of your CEO, CFO, and have them tell you what the business objectives can be. And that way you can think about these, you can practice these for when you actually have your conversations with those leaders. Most likely, if you have the CFO persona, it's going to say, we're worried about EBITDA. And now you can go off and research, what does that acronym stand for? So when I talk with my CFO, I can now lead these financial terms that might build a lot of relationship with us.
Exactly right. Shawn, this has been great. I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank you again for coming on. Look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.